You ever get so used to something that it becomes part of the background? That was me with the guy in apartment 4C. I didn't know his name. Still don't. At least not at this point in the story. But I knew his laugh. I knew the way his footsteps sounded in the hallway when he got home late. I knew the rhythm of his shower. Every night at around 10:45, like clockwork. It wasn't like I was spying. You live in a building with paper-thin walls. You end up knowing your neighbors whether you mean to or not. I live in 4B, right next door. Been here 3 years. It's a pre-war building in Brooklyn with creaky floors and a radiator that sounds like it's trying to break out of the wall half the time. Rent's manageable though, and I work from home doing freelance editing, so I've learned to deal with the noise. But him, 4C, he was a different kind of noise. It started with the music. He had a record player. I could tell by the way the bass rumbled in this warm, soft kind of way. Not the digital punch you get from Spotify. This was richer, and his taste was weirdly good. Otis Redding, Phoebe Bridgers, Frank Ocean, random jazz stuff I couldn't name, but always recognized in the background. It became my unofficial soundtrack. I started looking forward to it. There were nights when I'd mute my TV just to hear what he'd put on next. I didn't see him much. He was quiet in the halls, kept to himself. Always had a hoodie on, headphones around his neck, coffee in hand. But once or twice our eyes met on the stairwell. Just quick, casual glances. A polite nod. He had this face. Serious, but not cold. Like he was always halfway between thinking something deep and trying not to feel it. And then one night the music stopped. I noticed it because I was editing late and realized the usual Friday night groove wasn't there. At first, I figured maybe he was out, or sick, or dating someone who didn't vibe with his vinyl obsession. But the next night, still nothing. No music, no footsteps, no shower sounds, nothing. It was like he vanished. I told myself not to care. We weren't friends. I didn't even know his name. But I missed it. His presence, the sounds. The way the wall felt less like a wall and more like a shared rhythm. And then, a few days later, the sound came back. But different. It wasn't music this time. It was crying. Soft, muffled, broken crying. I froze the first time I heard it, my hands still on the keyboard. The room suddenly too quiet except for that. It came in waves. Not constant, but real. And raw. I stared at the wall for a while. I didn't know what to do. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Knock? Pretend I didn't hear? Text the landlord? So I did nothing. That first night, anyway. But the crying didn't stop. It came back the next night. And the next. Not always at the same time, but always the same sound. Like he was trying so hard to keep it in and failing just enough that I could hear it. After a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I baked banana bread. That sounds dumb, I know, but it was the only thing I could think to do. My mom used to say food was the closest thing to a hug you could give someone without touching them. So I made a loaf, wrapped it in foil, and stood in front of his door like an idiot for a full 3 minutes before knocking. He didn't answer at first. I almost left. I was halfway down the hall when the door finally creaked open. And there he was. Messy hair. Tired eyes. Hoodie zipped up to his chin. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "Hey," I said, suddenly very aware of how stupid the banana bread looked in my hands. I live next door, 4B. I made this. Thought you might want some." He blinked, looked at the bread, then back at me. For a second, I thought he was going to close the door. But then, he gave the tiniest nod, barely there, and said, "Thanks." His voice was low, raspy, like it hadn't been used much lately. I handed over the foil-wrapped loaf and forced a small smile. "I hope you're okay. Or at least, getting there." His eyes flicked to mine. Something passed between us. I couldn't name it. Not yet. Then he said, "You hear everything, don't you?" It wasn't accusatory, just tired. I hesitated. The walls are thin. He nodded, looked down at the bread like it was some kind of puzzle. I'm Theo, he said finally. 4C. I'm Jamie, I replied. He nodded again, then closed the door. Not rudely, just like he didn't have the energy to be anyone else. And I stood there, heart racing, wondering what the hell I'd just walked into. The door clicked shut, and I stood there like an idiot for a full 5 seconds before turning around and heading back to my apartment. It wasn't like I expected a thank you note or an invite in, or some dramatic outpouring of feelings. Honestly, I didn't know what I expected. But something about the way Theo had looked at me, like he'd forgotten how to let someone in, even for a second, stayed with me the rest of the night. Back in my apartment, I sat on the couch, lights off, banana breadcrumbs still clinging to the plate I saved for myself. And I listened. No music, no crying, no anything. For the first time in days, the silence from 4C felt deliberate. Like he was holding his breath. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I made coffee and stared at the wall for a while, wondering if he'd say anything, if he'd knock, if he'd text, assuming he somehow had my number. He didn't. Nothing. By Wednesday, I was back in my routine, editing client footage, answering emails, trying not to stare at the wall every 5 minutes like a psycho. I told myself I'd done my part. I reached out. It wasn't my business anymore. And then Thursday night, around 10:30, there was a knock at my door. It was soft, hesitant. I paused the video I was editing and opened the door. Theo. He looked a little better, or at least less ghost-like. Same hoodie, but cleaner. His hair was wet, like he'd just showered. His eyes still had that tired weight, but they weren't as empty. He held something out to me. The bread. Well, what was left of it? A plastic container with the last slice inside. I figured you might want this back, he said. I blinked. You didn't have to return the container. He shrugged. Seemed polite. I took it. Thanks. Neither of us moved. Then he said, do you want to come over just for a bit? My stomach dropped in that weird, excited, nervous way that makes you feel like you're in middle school again, but I kept my voice steady. Sure. His apartment was basically a mirror of mine, just flipped. Same layout, same creaky floors, but it felt different. Sparse. A little messy in that I don't care way, not the I'm filthy way. A hoodie was slung over a dining chair, 2 coffee mugs in the sink, a couple of empty beer bottles on the counter. A record was on the turntable, spinning silently. You haven't played anything in a while, I said before I could stop myself. He glanced at it. Didn't feel like it. I nodded. I noticed. He gave me a look then, not annoyed, just curious. You really hear all that? I shrugged. It's not like I try, but yeah. He walked over to the record player and dropped the needle. Otis Redding. That warm, familiar hum filled the space between us. We sat on the couch, not too close. A little awkward. Like 2 people on a first date who skipped all the small talk and were now trying to remember how to breathe. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, he said suddenly. I looked at him. You didn't. He nodded slowly, like he didn't totally believe me. I've been going through some stuff. You don't have to explain. I know, it got bad. Then worse. And I didn't really tell anyone. Still haven't, honestly. You don't have to tell me either, I said gently. But if you want to, I'm here. That made something in his expression soften. He looked down at his hands. It's a breakup, he said finally. 3 years. Ended in 2 texts and a voicemail. I winced. Shit, I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. We sat in the quiet for a bit, the music filling the gaps. Then he said, you know what's funny? I didn't even like him that much at the end. But losing him still wrecked me. Sometimes it's not about who you lost. It's about what you thought you had. He looked over. Yeah, that. I wanted to ask more. About what went wrong. About who the guy was. About what Theo needed right now. But instead, I said, "You want to play something else?" He raised an eyebrow. "You're offering to DJ in my apartment?" "I've been listening through the wall for months. Seems fair." He smirked, stood, and flipped through his records. After a moment, he pulled one out and held it up. "You know this one?" I did. Sufjan Stevens. Haunting and soft and way too emotional for two guys barely speaking. "You sure you're trying to feel better?" I joked. He chuckled. "You get it though, right?" "Yeah," I said. "I get it." He put it on. The needle dropped. The first notes filled the room like a memory. And something about the way he sat back down next to me, closer this time, his knee just barely brushing mine, made the space feel different. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full. The next time he knocked, it was raining. I'd been curled up on the couch with a blanket and a mug of tea, halfway through rewatching The Leftovers and trying not to spiral about a client who ghosted me after a 20-hour video edit. The knock was soft, like last time, and again, it was Theo. His hoodie was damp, clinging to his shoulders, hair pushed back, face clean-shaven for the first time since I'd met him. He looked better. Still tired, still guarded, but something in his eyes was clearer. "You busy?" he asked. "Not really." He didn't say anything else, just stepped in when I moved aside. I didn't ask why he was there. Didn't need to. He sat on the same end of the couch as last time, closer this time. Like we'd skipped the part where we pretend we need space. The rain tapped softly on the windows. The city outside blurred like a painting left out too long. After a few minutes of sitting there, not talking, he said, "Your apartment smells better than mine." I raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment?" He shrugged. "You got that cinnamon thing going on. Mine smells like dust and wet laundry." I smirked. "I'll take it." We watched the show in silence for a while, but I wasn't really paying attention. I could feel him there, every small shift, every breath. And at some point, I realized his thigh was pressed against mine. Not accidental. Not quite deliberate either. "You ever miss someone and not know if you missed the person or just how they made you feel?" He asked quietly, eyes still on the screen. I nodded. "All the time." He turned his head a little. "I think I miss how he made me feel when it was good, not the him at the end." "That makes sense." "Does it?" he asked. "Or am I just trying to justify being sad over a guy who stopped caring?" "You can be sad about someone who hurt you," I said. "Doesn't make it less valid." He looked at me. His eyes lingered. "You always say stuff like that," he said, "like you actually mean it." "I do." He was quiet after that. The episode ended, and we sat there through the credits, rain still tapping the glass. I was acutely aware of his hand resting near mine on the couch cushion. Not touching, but close. Everything in me felt like it was leaning in, even if my body hadn't moved. "You ever wonder what it'd be like to start over completely?" he asked, softer now. "Like, move away and change your name?" "Not that dramatic," he smiled faintly. "Just let go of all the stuff people expect from you. Who you've been, who you're supposed to be." "All the time," I said. His shoulder brushed mine when he leaned back. We stayed like that, barely touching but not pulling away. Then he asked, "Were you always this easy to be around?" I laughed under my breath. No, I think I just learned to stop pretending." He nodded. "I like that about you." The room went quiet again. And then he said, "Would it be weird if I stayed over tonight?" I looked at him. He didn't mean intimacy. That was obvious. His voice wasn't flirty. It wasn't charged. It was tired, raw, vulnerable. Not weird? I said. You sure? I'm sure. He nodded, exhaled through his nose, and stood. I'll grab my toothbrush. That made me smile. I didn't ask why he already had one here. I didn't want to break whatever this was by naming it too early. Later that night, we lay in my bed, backs to each other at first. The rain had stopped, but the sound lingered in my head. It felt like the kind of night where nothing big was supposed to happen, just two people trying to forget the world for a few hours. But sometime after midnight, he shifted. I felt it. His arm brushing mine, the covers rustling. Then his voice, low. You awake? Yeah. Can I? I didn't need him to finish. I rolled toward him. Not all the way. Just enough to let him know it was okay. His arm slid around my middle. Hesitant. Gentle. I let my hand rest on his. We didn't speak after that. His breath found a rhythm. So did mine. And for the first time in a while, I didn't mind the silence. We didn't talk about it the next morning. Theo was already up when I rolled over. Shirtless, standing in the kitchen, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs like it was something he'd done a dozen times. His hair was sticking up a little, like he'd slept hard, and there were faint creases on his cheek from the pillow. He looked like someone who belonged there. I stayed in bed for a few more seconds, just watching him. There was something weirdly intimate about it. Seeing someone in your space before you've said anything, before you've put the armor back on for the day. He turned and saw me watching. Hey, he said, voice still scratchy from sleep. Hope you like it strong. Better than weak, I replied, sitting up. He brought the mug over and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed. We didn't make a big deal of it. That was the thing about Theo. He never made anything feel heavy, even when he clearly was. He carried weight, but he didn't drag it behind him. He just let it live in the spaces between things. Sleep okay? He asked, settling onto the edge of the bed with his own mug. Yeah, you? He nodded. Better than I have in weeks. That made my chest tighten. We sat there in quiet, sipping coffee, not looking at each other, not because we were avoiding it, just because sometimes looking too directly at a moment makes it feel less real. Eventually, he glanced over. Thanks for letting me stay. You don't have to thank me. I do, he said. You didn't have to let me in. I wanted to. That quiet hung between us again, the kind that wasn't empty. Theo stared down into his mug. You know that feeling when you've been holding your breath, and then you finally let it out, but it still hurts? Yeah, that's what this week's been like. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. It felt like enough. He stayed a little longer than I expected. Long enough to finish his coffee, to let the morning soften around us. He didn't rush out, but when he finally stood, he looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should say something more. I'll see you around, he said. You can come back, you know. I told him, you don't need a reason. He hesitated, then said, I might take you up on that. And he left. The apartment felt too quiet afterward. I kept thinking about the way he'd said, see you around, like he wasn't sure he meant it. Like, maybe this, whatever it was, had already outlived its shelf life. But that night, around 10:45, the music came through the wall again. Warm, soft, Frank Ocean this time. I smiled into my mug of tea and leaned back on the couch, letting it wash over me. He didn't knock, but he didn't have to. The next few days settled into a kind of rhythm I didn't expect. Theo would knock some nights. Sometimes he'd stay for 10 minutes. Sometimes a few hours. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat in silence. A record spinning, the city humming outside the window. He never stayed over again, but the space between us kept getting smaller. One night, I offered him my hoodie when he came in soaked from the rain again. He put it on without asking, and when he left, he didn't give it back. Another night, we played cards, some dumb game we barely remembered the rules for. He lost and blamed the lighting. I told him he sucked at bluffing. He smiled, wider than I'd ever seen him smile, and said, you don't know the half of it. But the shift really happened on a Thursday. I was editing something late, some wedding footage with bad audio and too many slow zooms, when there was a knock at the door. It was past midnight. I figured it was Theo. But it wasn't. It was his voice through the wall, muffled, shaky. Jamie? I froze. Got up, pressed my ear to the wall. You there? I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and saw his door cracked open. He was standing there in pajama pants, bare feet, eyes red. I didn't want to knock, he said quietly. Didn't feel like I could. I stepped closer. What's wrong? He didn't answer right away, just opened the door wider. I stepped in. His apartment was dim, no music, no lights except for a low lamp in the corner. He sat down on the edge of his bed and looked up at me. I thought I was doing better, he said, but tonight it hit me again, like all of it just flooded back. I nodded, sat beside him. He didn't cry, but he looked like he could have. I don't know why I'm telling you this, he said. Because I'm here, I said softly. He looked at me, and then, so carefully it didn't feel like it was happening, he reached for my hand. He didn't say anything, neither did I. We sat there, just like that. Two guys, one bed, a quiet handhold in the dark. Nothing about it was dramatic, but everything about it felt real. He didn't let go of my hand, not after a few minutes, not even when I shifted slightly to face him better. Theo just kept holding on like he needed the contact more than he needed words. I didn't try to fill the silence. I didn't ask more questions. I just let it be. At some point, he laid back on the bed, our hands still linked between us. He stared at the ceiling, exhaling slowly like it was the first real breath he'd taken all day. I didn't think it would hit me like this, he said. I thought I was done being the pathetic ex. You're not pathetic, I said quietly. He turned his head toward me. You don't even know the whole story. I don't need to. Another pause. His thumb brushed lightly across mine. Barely there, but unmistakable. Do you ever feel like you're too much and not enough at the same time? He asked. Every day, I replied. He let out a soft, humorless laugh. Then you get it. Yeah, I said. I do. The room was still, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be broken. And then, just when I thought he might fall asleep, Theo whispered, Can you stay for a bit? Of course. I kicked off my shoes and lay down beside him. We didn't cuddle. We didn't shift closer than we already were. But our hands stayed together. And that was enough. For a while. I don't know when it started to change. Not in a dramatic fireworks kind of way. Just subtly, like light shifting across a wall as the day moves. He came over more. I went over there sometimes too. Sometimes he brought beer. Sometimes I cooked. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. We just existed in the same space like it had always been that way. He'd fall asleep on my couch and wake up embarrassed, and I'd tell him it was fine. He'd ask me what I was working on and actually listen when I explained. Even when it was boring editing stuff about dental software or city council meetings. And then one night, he kissed me. It wasn't planned, wasn't a lead-up, it just happened. We were sitting on my couch, a half-empty bottle of wine between us, a dumb movie playing in the background. He said something about how his ex never got his taste in movies, and I made a joke about how his taste still sucked, and he smirked, and then he leaned in. It wasn't a long kiss, or heated, it was short, soft, careful, and when he pulled back, he looked terrified. Shit, he said. I shouldn't have. I cut him off, not with another kiss, just with the words, You're okay. His eyes searched mine. You sure? I'm sure. He nodded, swallowed, then sat back a little, like he was still waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. We didn't kiss again that night. We didn't talk about it either. But the space between us, it was different now. Not tense, just fuller, like we'd opened a door and hadn't closed it. A few days later, he was in my kitchen again, wearing my hoodie again, barefoot like he lived here. He was scrolling through something on his phone while I made coffee, humming along to whatever was playing on the speaker. And out of nowhere, he said, Do you think people can fall into something without knowing they're in it? I looked up. Like a relationship? He shrugged. Not even that. Just a thing, a feeling, something that sneaks up. Yeah, I said. I think that happens all the time. He nodded slowly, like he wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, I think I'm in something. My hands froze on the coffee pot. With me? I asked, voice low. He nodded. I didn't say anything right away, because part of me had been waiting for that sentence, and another part wasn't sure what to do with it now that it was real. Theo stepped closer, setting his phone down on the counter. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. I don't know if I'm ready, but I know it feels better when I'm here, when I'm with you. I swallowed. Okay, that's enough for now, right? Yeah, I said. It is, and it was, at least for now. Theo didn't leave that night. It wasn't planned. I didn't ask. He didn't say anything. But after we finished our coffee, and he stepped around me to put his mug in the sink, he sort of hovered there, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. I knew that body language by now. He was trying not to ask something, so I did it for him. You staying over? He looked up. If that's okay. It's more than okay. He nodded once, quietly, then turned toward the hallway like he already knew the way to my bedroom. I followed. We didn't rush it that night. We didn't even kiss at first. Just lay in bed. Close, but not touching, like we were waiting for permission. From the moment, from each other, from something bigger. Then, slowly, I felt his hand reach for mine under the blanket. That was all it took. I turned toward him, and this time when our lips met, it wasn't cautious. It wasn't fast either. It was steady. Honest, the kind of kiss that doesn't try to prove anything. He touched my face like he was learning the shape of it. I curled my fingers into his hoodie, pulling him a little closer, and when he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, and he whispered, Still okay? Still okay? I breathed. It was slow. Nothing like those messy, skin-hungry nights from apps and first dates. This was different. This was about being seen, about feeling safe, about finally letting someone in. And when we finally fell asleep, his leg was tangled with mine, one arm across my chest, breath soft against my neck, like he belonged there. I woke up to the smell of toast, which made me laugh because I'd never seen Theo operate a toaster before, let alone my chaotic excuse for a kitchen. I pulled on sweatpants and padded out into the living room. He was standing over the stove, shirtless, hair a mess, wearing my gray hoodie from 2 weeks ago. The sleeves were too long. He looked good in it. Morning, he said without turning. Morning, I said, voice still groggy. You cooking or committing arson? He glanced over his shoulder. Little of both. There was a plate on the counter with 2 slices of toast, one half-burnt, the other perfectly golden. This is the control group, he said, pointing to the burnt one. That's the experiment. I walked over and took the good one. Appreciate your sacrifice. He handed me a mug. I made you the strong kind, the one you like. I sipped. It was perfect. We stood there, side by side, in the quiet morning light filtering through the curtains. No music, no rush. Just the sound of the city waking up outside and the warm hum of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Then, Theo said, Can I tell you something kind of terrifying? I looked at him. Always. He stared into his coffee for a second. Then, I don't think I've ever felt this safe with someone, not even when I was in love before. That hit me hard. He wasn't saying he loved me. He wasn't trying to define it. He was telling the truth. His truth. I nodded, setting my mug down. Then I stepped in front of him and wrapped my arms around his waist, burying my face in his hoodie. He held me tight. Same, I said. And I meant it. He didn't go back to 4C that day. Or the next. We didn't rush anything. We didn't call it anything. But he kept showing up, and I kept letting him in. Sometimes love doesn't come with a grand gesture or a perfect moment. Sometimes it arrives in quiet ways. In music through the walls, in banana bread, in hands held in the dark, and sometimes it just lives next door.